Everybody, I hope you're all doing well and you're staying safe and healthy at home. I know this is a weird time, a challenging time, but hopefully we can get through this together and use this opportunity to learn, to kind of distract ourselves from what's going on, and to really be productive and enrich our minds. Um, First, I want to say that I totally understand the struggles that many of you are probably having. Missing out on a lot of important aspects of your senior year is definitely hard. Remember, I'm in the same boat. I'm a senior in college, and so if you feel like you're alone, you're not. I encourage you to stay in contact with your friends, encourage each other, and just check up on one another. I'm also here for you if you have any questions about this lecture, or if you have any questions about some potential activities that I'll post on Google Classroom, please let me know. So we just finished Hamlet, or we put a pause on Hamlet when school got out, and we're going to move on now to this optional unit that centers around film. And I told you guys when we were still in the classroom that I was going to teach a unit on film, watching film, and analyzing it as if it's text, because technically, in another sort of way, it is literature in its own right. I want to continue to do that anyway. And I think it's especially fitting right now since we're all in quarantine, because who isn't watching Netflix movies and Hulu movies? I want to use this time, though, to learn how we can watch movies actively instead of passively. Now, what does that mean? A lot of times we watch TV shows and movies kind of half paying attention on our phones. It's sort of background noise, or we just watch it to get the surface plot. Filmmakers put a lot of work into setting up a scene, into deciding how the lighting is going to be, how the staging is going to be, what sounds are going to be used, the colors that are going to be featured, costuming, and so many other elements. So in this unit, we're going to focus on how do we identify those elements and those techniques and strategies for film, and how do we analyze them and understand how they come together to contribute to a deeper complexity of that film. Okay, and we're going to compare movies and books a little bit more as we go along in this unit. But first, what I want you to do is answer the following 3 or 4 questions. Now, you can write them down on paper, but at some point, I definitely want you to answer these on the Google Classroom discussion board. Okay, so the questions are: what is your favorite movie? What is the central theme of that movie? How is that movie relevant to today? Now, to clarify, that does not have to be in relation to the pandemic or isolation. However, it can be. This could be related to politics, society, economics, the environment, anything. Why is it important to you today? What does it have to do with your life? And then the final question is, I want you to come up with 3 words that describe your film. Okay, on Netflix, on the bottom of the movie icons, they have 3 words that describe the tone of the film to help viewers select a movie that would best fit their interests. I want you to do the same thing with your movie. And when you post those on Google Classroom, it could be helpful because not only will you be telling other people what movie you enjoy and why you enjoy it, but you can see what your classmates are posting, and those can be on your to watch list. Now, I do want to keep these ratings at or below PG-13, okay? No R, nothing more than that. We can find good movies that are appropriate for school and for each other. So go ahead and answer that question. You can pause this, take time to really think, and then when we come back, I'll share my answer. Okay, so hopefully we're all back and that wasn't too difficult for any of you. I'm going to share my favorite movie and the answers that I have about that. I have a lot of favorite movies, so this isn't necessarily the best of the best, but that's just because I couldn't pick one. But I chose to look at Les Miserables, and that's the new version with Hugh Jackman and Amanda Seyfried. So the central theme of that movie, I would say, is hope and love amidst darkness. I would even put grace in there, and forgiveness, perseverance as well. And the relevance that all has today is when the movie was set, times were dark. There was a lot of hopelessness and fear, but in spite of that, people came together in love and supported each other. Friendships, relationships, and even family love, in order to make way for a better tomorrow. And I think that that's really important today. And then 3 words to describe the tone of this movie. I would say those are somber, hopeful, and empowering. So those are my answers for my favorite movie. Before we really get into talking about the specifics of film, let's first talk about literature. Take a minute to try to think about when you believe that literature began. Okay, so this would have been before Mary Shelley, right? Before Jane Austen, of course, before Shakespeare, before Geoffrey Chaucer, before even the Bible. Okay, so even though the Bible tells the history of the beginning of time, when Moses wrote the Bible, sat down with his chisel and stone, he wasn't the first person to write a letter or write a symbol on a stone or on a tablet. People had been doing that even before him. And so the oldest account of written literature that we have is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is thought to be written around 2000 BC. Okay, so that is a very, very long time ago. Now, let's compare that to film. When did film begin? I want everyone to take a guess about what year would you say? Okay, so you can pause this video and write it down, and just think. When do you think it began? Okay, so the first motion picture was actually taken and recorded in 1878. Okay, this was called The Horse in Motion, and it was made by Edward Muybridge. Okay, we're gonna watch this Horse in Motion picture, and after we watch it, we're gonna talk about how it was done and what it means. So let's go ahead and do that. Kind of might remind you of what a lot of you probably did as children, where you take a notepad or a block of post-its, and you draw little pictures on each tab, and then you flip through them quickly, right? It's very staggered, staccato. It's not really, it doesn't flow perfectly, and we can see kind of the stops in this film of the man riding on the horse. So, what is a film? It's a motion picture, right? And so what a motion picture is pictures, just individual pictures that appear to be moving. It's just an illusion. And so Edward Muybridge came up with this idea by setting up cameras and kind of tripwire so that when the horse rode across, those cameras would in succession take pictures, and then he took all of those individual photos and put them together, sped them up, which gave the illusion of a moving picture. And so this is the very first illusion of movement that was created. And of course, when you look at box office movies today, it looks nothing like this. And this has only been about 200, not even 200 years ago. So now we're going to watch the first movie. Right, so that horse moving was a motion picture, but it didn't have a plot. And what makes a movie is the plot. And so here we have the first movie that was ever created. Now this was without sound. At this time, cameras couldn't pick up sound, and so a lot of times music would be placed over the film. And so they were silent films. This movie that I'm about to show you guys is about 15 minutes long. We're not going to watch all of it. I'll skip ahead and skip through it. This is called The Great Train Robbery, and it was made in 1903 and directed by Edwin S. Porter. Okay, and so I want you to kind of, as you watch it, think about what are the differences between this film and films that we watch today. And there are a ton of differences, but just be brainstorming those. Alright, well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and discuss it. I hope you guys kind of wrote down some things that you were thinking as you watched that, or at least mentally noting some differences that you saw in this production versus what you would normally see in the theater or at your home. Some things that I noticed are that there are no cuts in each individual scene. They take a scene in one shot, and then they go to the next one, and then they take that scene in one shot, right? There are no camera angle switches, no different perspectives that we might see in a modern film. It's just done continuously. There's also no camera movement. So a lot of times they were set up on tripods or held by people, and they were stabilized, and so there wasn't any movement. And as we know in movies today, there are a lot of sweeping moves, dolly shots where the camera follows the actor, zoom ins, zoom outs, aerial shots, wide shots, narrow shots. So many different ways you can film within one scene that really add a lot of depth to what's going on. Other things that, of course, we talked about before was that there is no sound made by the actors. When they had those gunshots that you guys saw, you didn't hear the gunshots, you just had to visually see the powder. And so they had to get creative in kind of demonstrating when a sound should have been heard. But instead of having voices and sound effects, they just had music. And we could talk a long time about how that music contributed to the tone of that movie and to the tone of each scene, how the music changed as the stakes maybe were raised. But having a continuous sound definitely gives a different feel than having pops and bangs, dialogue, even the absence of sound, or quiet sound that's more supplemental. And so that's another big difference. Obviously, you notice that there is no color, and since there's no color, it's hard to really create interesting effects with lighting. So while this movie lacked a lot of what we really love today to see in movies, it was the first of its time. And so we all know that in order for something to become great, we have to start somewhere. And this was amazing for its time, but we have grown in our ability to make deep and interesting and exciting movies. Now, let's go back to talking about when literature started. Literature started maybe even before 2000 BC, and it's been growing and developing for at least 4,000 years. It's kind of the same concept with film, only we're at the front end of it. So this is still a changing field, a changing area of study, and we kind of have the ability to shape it in whatever way that we want. We're kind of the pioneers, so to speak, in this area of study, and just recently have colleges and schools really taken this on as a serious subject. And so this is really exciting, and there are all kinds of different ways that you can even teach me, insights that you can bring that I might not have heard of before, because this is such a fast-paced, ever-changing, relatively new area of study. So hopefully you guys have looked at the PowerPoint and the vocabulary list that I posted on Google Classroom before you started this video. There are a lot of vocab words for camera angles. And camera angles are very important to understand in film because of the tone that they can set. One camera angle in particular that I think is important, or a pair that I think is important, is the low angle versus the high angle, right? So the high angle is when the camera captures something from the vantage point of somebody or something that's taller than the subject, and then low angle is the same thing, only set lower than the subject. Now this gives a lot of meaning without stating the meaning in words. What I mean by that is if you have a high angle, then the character seems small and powerless. And the narrator of a book might have to say the character was small and powerless. But in a movie, you see that just based on how the frame looks and how the angle of the camera is. This is the same thing when there's a low angle and the character looks bigger and taller. That gives the impression of power. And you can go through all of the camera angles that I listed on that vocabulary list and see how choosing them at certain times is very important, and how choosing them in other times could be inappropriate, right? For example, if you had a superhero who just like defeated the big giant monster and everything was amazing, you wouldn't want that character to look powerless. You would want to use your camera angles in whatever way you can to make them look powerful because they had just done something great. And this can be a lot of examples. If you want a character to seem really sure of themselves, you wouldn't want to use an angle that's kind of crooked, because that indicates confusion. And if they're sure of themselves, they're not confused, so you would want to use maybe a full body shot, maybe a low angle, maybe a wide shot even, to show that they like know what they're doing. And you could even use a close-up of their eyes. So there are all kinds of different camera angles that you can use, and when you're watching movies, you want to ask yourself, why did the director choose that camera angle? What is he trying to tell me with that? Hopefully you guys caught up on a lot of that and were able to identify a lot of the camera angles there. Again, we see a lot of intentionality behind changing camera angles and the motion of cameras. This isn't just to make the scene jump around and be more interesting. There's intentionality behind all of that, just like there's intentionality behind word choice in literature and behind punctuation in literature and even the setup of a chapter. Now, those things in literature really help us to understand the deeper meaning of the text, but obviously we can't see those things in film. And so film is similar to literature in that we do look at different elements to have a broader, more deep understanding of the whole work. Those elements are different. However, there are some that are similar, such as characterizations in the way that they describe each other, maybe even the script, the style in which the script is written, and the way that we kind of analyze tone and things like that. So there's some similarities, but the building blocks in a lot of ways are pretty different, and so that's why we're gonna use a lot of what we already know from our analyzing. That's why we're going to use a lot of what we already know from analyzing literature, apply that to film, but also kind of look at different ways that film takes it and makes it its own. And so we're going to look at a couple other examples of the ways that you can use cameras to change the meaning of a scene and to create depth and even characterization. So,
okay, changed my scenery a little bit, but the last thing that I want you guys to do is go on to Google Classroom and click the link to watch the video on YouTube that's about a scene from the movie Cold War. When you watch it, the director is going to actually be talking about the reasons that he made certain camera angle decisions in that clip. You're going to see a lot of chaos and how the camera follows the main character, which will be indicative of what that main character is feeling. And so that's kind of a way to read between the lines by watching the way that a camera captures a scene. So what you're going to do after you watch that is write a paragraph from the perspective of the woman who is the subject of the scene, and write almost like a diary entry. What was she feeling that night and when she was at that place? And once you do that, post it and I'll read it. And then feel free to watch that clip that's in Google Classroom as many times as you need to really like understand how the director really did convey the deeper meaning of the scene through his choices and as he explains that.